Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Ma'am Odessa Tagad. So for this very afternoon, we are now in the chapter 10 of our lesson, and chapter 10 is young adulthood. And as our group, we will be discussing the physical development, cognitive development, and emotional and social development. As for my task, I will be discussing to you the physical development. So what is inside of physical development in young adulthood? So let's proceed. So before as I continue this topic, I have some examples in you. Um, this kind of examples is the markers of or um, the mark of being young adulthood um, in other cultures or sa kanya-kanya na mga cultures. So, we have three examples here. At age of 25, Kimby became a young adult. It had been a long process and 11 years in all. In his culture, the Samburu of Kenya in West Africa, the process of reaching manhood is long and highly ritualized. It begins with a public circumcision ritual at about age of 14. Kimby remembered it well, how difficult it had been to suffer the cutting of the foreskin of his penis before a crowd without flinching. But he had come through it with honor and had become a junior warrior for 5 years, during which he was with the other junior warriors nearly all day, every day. Um, they learned how to hunt, take care of cattle, and this is the main source of Samburu wealth and economic activity, and protect his family and his tribe. When the 5 years end, there was a ceremony in which Akembi and the other boys became senior warriors and received a new name to denote their higher status. Now, 6 years later, he had just had his bull ceremony in which he had sacrificed a bull and shared the meat with all the people in his community. It had taken Candy several years to save enough money to buy the bull, but it had been worth it to show that he was capable of providing for a wife and children. Now that he was considered a worthy man, he would be allowed to marry and have children and to join the council of elders in making decisions important to the community, based on Gilmore, 1990. So another example here was at age of 17, Ifer became a young adult. She had married her husband the previous year, a young man who had grown up in the same Turkish village as she did, and now they had been blessed with a child, a boy who would carry on the family line. It all happened so fast. Sometimes it seemed to her like just yesterday that she was playing with other girls in the village square, with adult responsibilities the farthest thing from her mind. Then at age 15, she had come into her blood or beginning of her monthly menstruation. And soon after she was married to Kimal, which is her husband, just before he left to complete his mandatory military service, she had not known him well before the wedding. The marriage was arranged by their parents, and she still felt sometimes that they barely knew each other, as he had been away with his military unit for most of the time, and now they were not just wife and husband but mother and father. Yet Ifer knew that her own mother had married even younger, at age 14, and her father at 16. Although her husband was away, she lived with her father and mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law was too kind to her and seemed to know all about how to keep babies safe and healthy. With the help of others also, Ifer was confident she would be ready for the challenges of her young adult life, based on Delany 2000. And in Japan, these examples of Kichi. At age of 30, Kichi became a young adult. By then, she had been emerging into adulthood for a long time, over a decade, but this is not unusual in Japan. She had changed jobs several times during her 20s, mostly different kinds of office work. Eventually, she decided to get more education and took a training course at a junior college to become a medical technician. Now, she had been working in a hospital for several years and she was a capable and reliable worker. However, stable work was not what had made her feel lately like she had at last, at last reached adulthood. Perhaps it was the decision to move out of her parents' home and find an apartment of her own. Perhaps also it was the awareness that living on her own would mean taking on a lot of the daily responsibilities she had never had to worry about before. Whatever the reason, Kichi had mixed feelings about reaching young adulthood. Although she took some satisfaction in being able to stand on her own and live an independent life, she also felt that life had been easier in many ways when her parents took care of her and she did not have to make so many decisions for herself based on Rosenberg 2007. So, as these examples show, there are many ways of reaching young adulthood and many ages at which the entrance to young adulthood can be marked. A key reason for the cultural variation in age of reaching young adulthood is that some cultures have a period of emerging adulthood in between adolescence and young adulthood and some do not. So, further complication is that the passage from emerging adulthood to young adulthood can be said to take place when a person meets culturally accepted criteria for adult status, but these criteria vary. Example just presented, the Sambaro consider young men to have entered adulthood when they complete their 11-year warrior training. Young Sambaro women also enter adulthood earlier when they reach menarche. Rural Turkish culture considers full adulthood to be reached once a young couple has their first child, and the Japanese, like people in other developed countries, tend to view adulthood as occurring gradually through the attainment of a variety of criteria that denote independence and self-sufficiency. So, in physical development, we have two subtopic and also what makes an adult. And in what makes an adult, the transition to adulthood, cross-cultural themes, and the transition to adulthood, cultural variation. And in physical functioning and health, aging begins, overweight and obesity, and the importance of exercises. As and also in physical development, we have objectives. We can learn objectives. So, name the three top criteria for adulthood according to young people across cultures. Summarize the cultural variation in criteria for adulthood. Specify the signs of the beginning of physical aging and when they appear. Explain how obesity is defined, its causes, its consequences, and the keys to prevention. And lastly, explain the benefits of exercising and the negative effects for not exercising in young adulthood. So what makes an adult? For adult life stages, there are no clear age divisions that mark the end of one stage and the beginning of the next. Marking the beginning of young adulthood is especially complex and challenging. If young adulthood could be said to begin with the transition into stable adult work, marriage, and parenthood, which is one definition of adulthood commonly used in the social sciences, then young adulthood may begin as early as the late teens, especially in developing countries, or as late as the early 30s, especially in developed countries. So, in transition to adulthood, for cross-cultural themes, there are many studies that examine what young people in various countries view as the key markers of the transition to adulthood. The results of the studies have been remarkably similar in countries including the United States, Argentina, Czech Republic, Romania, Austria, the United Kingdom, Israel, and China. And across these studies, young people from their early teens to their late 20s agreed that the most important markers of the transition to adulthood are these three top criteria for adulthood. So, these three are accepting responsibility for oneself, second, making independent decisions, and lastly, becoming financially independent. So, I agree with this because these three, actually, na-possess na ko ni. Like, I have this, kani sila, nga mga criteria, accepting responsibility for oneself, and also this making independent decisions. So, in decisions, naga ano na ko for my kanang naga-depende na gito sa ko ang decisions that, like for example, as today I nagbalik og eskwela because decision ako ang mabalik og eskwela, and then financially independent, but somehow as of now I dili ko tawag nito dependent, but I mean, sorry, as of now is dependent ko sa ko ang ate, but later, or back when I was working, I am an independent financially. So as what I said earlier, these three characterized by individualism. Kaning tatlo is characterized ni siya individualism. That all three emphasize the importance of learning to stand alone as a self-sufficient person without relying on anyone else. Sabi ni Arnett, 1998. The criteria for adulthood favored by emerging adults in developed countries reflect the individualistic values of those societies. So, in cultural variation, in cultural variation in criteria for adulthood, there are some of examples here, like in Israel, by completing military service as important for becoming an adult, reflecting Israel's requirement of mandatory military services. And also in Argentina, young Argentines especially value being able to support a family financially, perhaps reflecting the economic upheavals in Argentina and experienced for many years. And in Korea and China, in emerging adults in Korea and China view being able to support their family financially as necessary for adulthood, reflecting the collectivistic value of obligation to parents found in Asian societies. Even ako, before, nagtrabaho ko, like, yes, young adulthood naman yun ko. I belong to young adulthood because of my age. I'm already 28. And then, way back, itong nag-work ko, like, I have an obligation with my parents na kaya nag-work ko, so obligation ako nga maghatag sa ako ang dinikanan do. Dili sila depende sa ako kung pilaan ako ang mapadala do, pero nag-obliga ko sa akong kaugalingon, labi na kung nag-eskwela ko ang maguwang or ang akong ate nag-eskwela siya, so obligation ako to siya nga muhatag. And also in India, emotional self-control is one of the top criteria for adulthood. So, lahi pud ang ilahang tawag nito, markers to kanang tawag nito para maging adulthood is ang emotional self-control. So, this is consistent with the collectivistic emphasis in Indian culture on consideration of the well-being of others. So, what should we make of that contrast? Or tawag nito, what about traditional cultures? So nagkanya-kanya man gyud ang variation when it comes culture. So naapoy ka ng traditional cultures. So do they have different ideas about what marks the beginning of adulthood compared to developed countries? And then the answer is yes. According to anthropologists, have found that in virtually all traditional non-Western cultures, the transition to adulthood is clearly and explicitly marked by marriage. According to Schlegel and Barry, 1991, it is only after marriage that a person is considered to have attained adult status and is given adult privileges and responsibilities. And in contrast, very few young people in developed countries consider marriage to be an important marker of the transition to adulthood. In fact, in developed countries, marriage ranks near the bottom in surveys of possible criteria for adult status. Even ako. Um, if ako ang mag-agig survey, naagid siya sa pinaka low level ang marriage because when you are in young adulthood, it's not like is given na when in traditional cultures given siya na pag once magsulod ka sa marriage life, so you will be an adult, but sometimes in my opinion na there are marriage people na they are immature enough, they are immature in their handling their marriage, di ba, magkabuwag pa. So it's not the but it's a culture siya. Okay, so what should we make of that contrast? One possible interpretation would be that traditional culture elevate marriage as the key transition to adulthood because they prize the collectivistic value of interdependence or mutual obligations more highly than the individualistic value of interdependence, which this marriage signifies that a person is taking on a new interdependent relationship outside the family of origin, according to Arnett 1995 and Schroeder in 2006. That marriage is a social event rather than an individual psychological process, and it represents the establishment of a new network of relationship with all the kin of one's marriage partner. So, according also in Susan Davis and Douglas Davis, 2007, they asked young Moroccans, how do you know you are grown up? They found that the most common types of responses were, first, those that emphasize chronological age or physical development, such as the beginning of facial hair among boys, and two, those that emphasize character qualities such as developing self-control. Few young people mentioned marriage, even though Davis stated that in Moroccan culture generally after marriage, one is considered an adult. This suggests that further investigation of young people's conception of the transition to adulthood in traditional cultures may prove enlightening, and that their views may not match the conceptions of adulthood adulthood held by adults. So let's proceed to physical functioning and health. So in aging begins, in cultures that value a youthful appearance, methods have been developed to conceal the physical changes in hair that accompany young adulthood. And based on some research, and based on some studies that um, nag-appear, or even ako naana sa ako naana sa ako ang uban, at the same time wrinkles, there are some part of my face na wrinkles. So this is the markers of nga young adulthood na ka. Okay, so changes in skin and muscle tone also influence physical appearance. Levels of human growth hormone gradually decline in young adulthood and beyond, causing the skin to become looser and the amount of muscle mass to decrease. Most of the other physical changes that are part of aging are more subtle in young adulthood. The heart muscle starts to become more rigid, but this is not noticeable except during times of intense physical activity when there is a decrease in the maximum heart rate, which in return, which in turn decreases the amount of oxygen that the heart can deliver to the body, according to Haywood and Getchell 2001. And in aging begins, like the cardiovascular system, changes in the respiratory system are subtle and gradual in young adulthood. Rigidity gradually develops in the tendons and muscles of the lungs, chest and ribs, which leads to a decrease in vital capacity. This the maximum amount of air that can be contained in the lungs. The immune system also shows sign of aging in young adulthood. As noted, it is strongest in emerging adulthood, and consequently, rates of a wide range of illnesses and diseases are low. So, in physical functioning and health in young adulthood, um, we may um, experience overweight and obesity. So why we have nganong in young adulthood is mo appear na din ni ang overweight and obesity. So for nearly all of human history, obtaining enough food has been a problem. Today, people in many developed countries are facing a different kind of food problem. Not too little food but too much, especially too much food that is loaded with fats and sugar. So isa sa mga factors nga nung ang tao is especially in young adulthood na overweight and obesity because of the sugar and the fats. Today, the risk of food scarcity and starvation are low in developed countries, yet the satisfaction we find in consuming fats and sugars remains. So many people in developed countries have a problem with overweight and obesity. So, problem siya sa mga developed countries because the tawag nito like junk foods or any nga kargado o kanang fats, sugars is in developed countries barato ra siya. So BMI or body mass index is a measure of the ratio of height to weight, which seems clear and unambiguous as a measure of overweight and obesity. BMI is used as a measure of overweight and obesity because it is an indirect measure of body fat. That is, the higher a person's BMI, the more body fat they are likely to have in proportion to their height. So what causes of obesity? And for young adulthood is a crucial time for the development of obesity. An important physiological change takes place beginning at the age of 25 in the basal metabolic rate or BMR, which is the amount of energy the body uses when at rest. From age 25 to 50, the average person's BMR declines as a natural part of the aging process. In National American Study involving thousands of adolescents, known as the National Study of Adolescent Health, followed them from their teens to age 24 to 32. Over that time, obesity rates increased from 13% among the adolescents to 36% by the time they were young adults. Within developed countries, the opposite pattern often prevails. People in the lowest socioeconomic classes with the least money have the highest rates of obesity. What explains this paradox? The main reason appears to be that in rich countries, unhealthy foods are cheap. So muna akong giingon kaganiha as as I mentioned it earlier na sa mas progressed na country, ang unhealthy food is very cheap na. Junk foods, ano siya. So, what is the consequences and remedies for obesity? So, obesity places people at risk for a variety of health problems in young adulthood and beyond. Common problems resulting from obesity in young adulthood are high blood pressure, diabetes, sleep disorders, and digestive problems. There is no magic method for weight loss. The conclusion of research on how to lose weight is dauntingly simple, but at least it's free. Eat less, eat healthier, fewer fats and sugars, and exercise more. Sorry. So in physical functioning and health, we have this the importance of exercise. So why exercise are very important, especially on young adulthood. So for young adults who do exercise regularly, there are many benefits, especially if it is aerobic exercise that substantially elevates the heart rate for at least 30 minutes. According to you in 2003, aerobic exercise includes activities such as running, swimming, and aerobic dancing, as well as a wide range of sports such as soccer and basketball. A study that followed adults in Denmark over several decades showed that death rates were lower for those who maintained regular exercise in adulthood and for those who increased their levels of exercise from low to moderate or high. So, so adults at lower SESR socioeconomic status levels exercise less than those at higher social economic status levels for, for a variety of reasons, including less access to health facilities, which usually cost money, and less safe neighborhoods. Across socioeconomic status groups, women exercise less than men. Mas ano gyud ang men sa exercises compare sa women. I mean, mas eager mag-exercise si woman compare kay men kasi sa woman man good is ano na sa if kumbaga ano na si woman, like for example aerobics like Zumba. Okay, so what explains the low levels of participation in exercise? If it has so many benefits, a big part of the explanation is the busy pace of modern life, especially in young and middle adulthood. So, kung ngano daw nga daghan man kaya ang exercise is daghan siyang benefits, why young adults or middle adulthoods cannot get exercise? Because of the busy pace of modern life. Way back in my experience, when I was working at the Home Credit Consumer Finance Philippines, I was a senior sales associate. Way back, I have so much sedentary life compare a healthy lifestyle. I have this sedentary lifestyle because ginakaon ako is more on sugar, more on fats, and also I do not exercise. I do not exercise daily or even once a week. I do not exercise. Though naga-walking ko sometimes naga-walking ko, like for example mahurot ako ang pamasahe, then ang area is doon lang man siya sa ako ang boarding house before, so ginabaktas lang ako siya, pero dili ko makaingon gud nga kanang I'm a healthy lifestyle person but sedentary lifestyle. So although dieting generally has poor results, the prevalence of obesity is inspiring intensive research efforts to develop medications that will prevent weight gain or promote weight loss. So that's it with my presentation or my report. So for the next topic will be the cognitive development, and it will be going to share with my group mates. So thank you. Have a happy learning.